Some kids had the Game Boy. Some had the Game Gear. And others had the Atari Lynx. Today we're talking about every single co-op game on the Atari Lynx. I captured all of this footage with real hardware. I have two Atari Lynx consoles, one that is modified to output VGA, and a stock Model 1 console as well, where I did off-screen captures. Let's get started. Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. This is a unique game for the Lynx. It plays like an RPG or a Zelda game, but there isn't any combat. You and your partner are mostly just gonna split up and explore the area, looking for the musical notes. I like that you're not stuck to one screen. That's the main benefit of playing co-op handheld games, is you're able to just split up and explore separately. The objective of the game is never quite clear, and you're mostly just gonna be walking around. You are able to hold in a button to run, so that's a plus. But you do have infinite lives and a password system, so you're able to pick up where you left off. I never made a lot of progress in this game, so it's something I definitely want to go back to and try again. This is really one of the most interesting games on the Atari Lynx, and it's just a unique co-op game for the time. BasketBrawl is a sports game which I usually skip over, but I wanted to include this game because it's a little bit different, as it's not just a straightforward basketball game. This one has some beat 'em up elements as well, kind of like arch rivals. So while you're playing basketball, you and a friend can team up and fight the enemies. You can punch them, you can pick up weapons, and you can stab them. And those are the kind of sports games that I usually actually like. Ones that are a little bit more silly and arcadey, and less like a sports simulator. But that's where my positivity towards this game ends. This is actually a very bad game. The sound effects are awful. And the gameplay is slow and clunky, so I definitely would not recommend BasketBrawl. You could also play it on the Atari 7800, where I would also not recommend it. Double Dragon. Just like every other console from this time, the Atari Lynx got a port of Double Dragon, and this is a surprisingly good version. Visually, it's very close to the arcade game, which is just impressive to see for this hardware. The original version came out in 1987 in the arcades, and the Atari Lynx came out just 2 years later in 1989. It's pretty incredible that this hardware being crammed into a handheld was able to run a game like this. And it's a pretty faithful port. In fact, I think this is one of the best home ports of Double Dragon from the era. And unlike the NES version, this one can be played in 2-player co-op. In some ways, I think it's better than the arcade version. It doesn't have nearly as much slowdown, but that being said, it's still a bit choppy here and there. Similar to the Bill and Ted game, you're not stuck to one screen. You're able to actually split up a little bit. Of course, you can't just run to the end of the level while the other player stays at the beginning of the level, but you are not restricted to one single screen, which is definitely a benefit because the screen here is kind of zoomed in, so you don't have a lot of real estate to work with. The main downside here are the controls though. It always just feels a little bit off. There are only 2 buttons on the Atari Lynx, but that's no excuse. The NES version and the Sega Master System version, I think, handled the control department a lot better. It's just confusing and hard to wrap your head around. Despite all of these things, I still think that this is a pretty decent port of Double Dragon. And it's just very impressive to see on 1989 handheld hardware. So for that, I definitely recommend it. Gauntlet: The Third Encounter. This game came out in 1990, and it's an exclusive to the Atari Lynx. This is basically the same classic Gauntlet formula. It's a top-down dungeon crawler where you and a friend just run around and destroy all the enemies as well as the generators. You gather keys and potions and you find the exit and you move on. Nothing new here really, but there are a couple of standout features. For one, the Atari Lynx has the ability to switch it to a vertical mode, and this is one of those games. It plays a little bit awkward, but it's kind of cool that they changed it up here. You have one hand on the D-pad and the other goes above to push the buttons. So it's not exactly comfortable. This is not a game that I have been able to sit down and play for a long period of time, specifically because, yeah, it's not very comfortable. Another thing that's kind of unique are the character classes. There are 6 new classes here. You have a samurai, a punk rocker, an android, a gunfighter, a nerd, and a pirate. And you can play this one with up to 4 players. I wouldn't say that this is the best Gauntlet game, but it's definitely the one that gets overlooked the most. I've only been able to play it with 2 players, because I only have 2 Atari Lynx consoles. Yeah, it'd be fun to try this with 4 players. There's also a version of Joust on the Atari Lynx. There's not much to say about this game. The original arcade version of Joust came out in 1982 and is definitely one of the most important games when it comes to co-op gaming. Back then, there were very few co-op games available, but by the time this was released on the Atari Lynx, I believe in 1992, there were plenty of other home ports of Joust that existed. You had the NES, and you even had the Atari 2600 and 5200 and 7800, and some other ports as well. So it was definitely less exciting in 1992. I guess the main benefit here is that you could now play Joust on a handheld. So I guess that was cool. But if you don't know Joust, it's basically a very early single screen platformer. You and a friend team up, you tap the button to fly, and you want to land on the opponents to destroy them. But if you're not careful, it's pretty easy to take out your friend as well. Once you take out your opponents, they drop an egg. You get the egg and then you get some points. I love Joust, but this is probably not the version that I would choose to play. Raiden is a vertical scrolling shoot 'em up. It originally came out in arcades in 1990, but it was ported to pretty much every home console available. Came out on the Super Nintendo, the TurboGrafx, and then later, the PlayStation. And of course we got a version on the Atari Lynx. And it's actually a pretty decent version. Again, for the time, it was just very novel to play such a colorful, fast-paced shoot 'em up on a handheld. And this is another one of those games where you turn the Lynx vertically and play it that way, which works really well for a vertical shoot 'em up. Unfortunately, when I was playing this game though, I kept having a communication error or something between my Lynx, so it kept crashing. I don't know if this is just a problem with my ROM cart or my consoles, or if this is just a known issue for Raiden on the Atari Lynx. So I can't speak to the quality of the co-op gameplay itself. Does anyone know if this is a common issue? Another very popular arcade game of the 80s was Rampage, and like some of these other games, it was ported to pretty much every single console of its time, including the Atari Lynx. How about that? This version came out in 1990, and it plays pretty much just like any other version of Rampage. But this version has 4 monsters. You have George, the giant gorilla, Lizzie, the giant dinosaur or lizard, Ralph, who's like a giant werewolf, and then you have this new character named Larry, who's a giant rat. You and your friends team up, destroy everything in sight, the buildings, the humans, and the vehicles. Once you destroy everything, you move on to the next level. I've always been a fan of Rampage, especially when I was a kid, but playing it now, it just gets a bit repetitive, so it's not a game that I really want to spend too much time with. That being said, like a lot of these ports, it's just impressive to see this game with this quality of visuals on handheld hardware from 1989. It might not be the best version of Rampage, but it's definitely a good one, so you can't go wrong playing Rampage on the Atari Lynx. Todd's Adventures in Slime World. This game originally came out on the Atari Lynx in 1990. It was later ported to the Sega Genesis and the PC Engine CD. There's a lot to love about this game. On its surface, it just looks like a normal platformer, but it actually has some Metroidvania mechanics, as you're going to be exploring a lot around this area. The standout feature of the Atari Lynx version is that you can play this game with up to 8 players. Of course, I've never come anywhere near this. I've only been able to play it with 2 players, but it's definitely a lifelong goal to be able to play the 8-player version of this game. I can't imagine how that would run. And from what I've read, it's the first 8-player game ever made. Unfortunately, this game does have some downsides. The music and sound effects are just terrible. Some of the worst I've ever heard. And the gameplay itself is very slow. The controls are kind of frustrating, but some things that I do enjoy, I mentioned the exploration, that's definitely a unique feature, but also I like that as you take damage, you start to become more and more green, like you're getting covered in slime. And in order to heal yourself, you jump into a pool of water, then you start washing yourself off. That's just some nice attention to detail. I like that you can climb on walls, and you can get a number of power-ups here. Unfortunately, the main water gun that you have, it just kind of sucks. But you can get a triple shot, a slime gun, and you can also get bombs as well as a jetpack. The jetpack is definitely going to help with your exploration. Even though this game feels very dated by today's standards, I still have a soft spot for it. It's definitely a game that I can't recommend to everybody, but if you want to find something that's a little bit more slow paced, that you can just take your time with, and you can explore every nook and cranny with a friend, or 7, then maybe this is the game for you. Another really great arcade port is Xenophobe, and this game was ported to a lot of consoles, but the Atari Lynx version is pretty solid. Unlike the arcade version, this one actually has a proper ending. And like the arcade version, you can play this one in 3-player co-op. I've only been able to play it 2 players though. If you don't know Xenophobe, it's a pretty interesting game. You basically are in a spaceship overrun by aliens. You and your friend are going to walk around side to side and explore every nook and cranny to destroy all of the enemies. Once you destroy them all, then you can move on. Visually, I think this game looks really good for its time, especially for this hardware. Another unique feature to the Lynx port is that one player can play as one of the aliens. Of course, if you're trying to play cooperatively, this is not going to help you in any way, as this player will be trying to work against you. But if you want to try something competitive, you have that option. When it comes to home ports of Xenophobe, the Atari Lynx might be the best port. This one's definitely highly recommended. Xybots might be the first example of a third-person shooter. If anything, it definitely had an influence on that genre. I'm a big fan of this game, and it might be my favorite game on the Atari Lynx. It works really well having your own screen, so you can both split up and explore these mazes separately. Or of course you could stay side by side and team up and take out the enemies. The objective is very simple. You just go through the mazes and you're looking for the exit. Along the way, you're going to pick up money and destroy enemies. Between levels, you're able to upgrade your stats by some extra health or some extra firepower. I think this game is really impressive for the hardware. And for its time, there's really nothing else like it. The original arcade version of this game, you played it in split screen, but I think having your own screen definitely makes the Atari Lynx version stand out. I've never played through this entire game, but it's something I definitely want to try. There are a total of 52 levels, so it's something that's going to take some time, which is kind of a problem for the Atari Lynx. Did I tell you that this thing takes a lot of batteries, and they drain very quickly? You're going to want to pull out your AC adapter and plug this one in. If I had to recommend one co-op game on the Atari Lynx, I think Xybots would be that game. It's my favorite. It's definitely a hidden gem in the world of co-op gaming. And now for the final game, we're going to talk about Zarlor Mercenary. And this one is an exclusive to the Atari Lynx. Came out in 1990, and it's a vertically scrolling shoot 'em up. This is another one that says you can play with up to 4 players co-op. So I definitely want to try that out at some point. This game has some really nice visuals. At times, it looks like it could be a Sega Genesis game. At the start of the game, you're able to pick your pilot. There are 7 pilots to choose from, each with their own unique abilities and weapons. After each mission, you go to a shop where you can buy and upgrade your weapons. The game is very difficult, but there are only 6 levels. And with the addition of 2 to 4 player co-op, I think I would have to recommend this one over Raiden, especially because I never got a chance to play Raiden co-op properly. Either way, this is a game that can only be found on the Atari Lynx, and it's a really good one, so I highly recommend it. So those are all of the co-op games on the Atari Lynx. Are there any that we missed? If you enjoyed this video, check out this video where we talked about every single co-op game for the 3DO. And thanks for watching.